Well, joining us now live from London is CEO of Bank to the Future, Mr. Simon Dixon. Also with us live from Paris, journalist and broadcaster Max Keiser, and with us via Skype from Tennessee, freelance writer and editor Paul Barrow. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. My first question to our guest in London, Mr. Dixon. Analysts have been saying, Mr. Dixon, that over the past couple of years, Europe has gone through a long series of crunch moments in its debt crisis. But this September, they say, is shaping up as a make or break month. Would you agree with that? Or would you say, rather, that policymakers are running short of options to save the euro?
Well, the policymakers will always come up with a new creative way of trying to refinance the Ponzi scheme and continue solving debt with more debt. It's never going to work in the long run, but I think they always want to put off the inevitable. We've been doing it for 2 years. It's gone on a lot longer than 2 years. It's just been noticeable for the last 2 years. And that has to come to an end. So if we can start looking at doing some kind of drastic changes, and they can start admitting that there's something that we need to do now, rather than refinancing the Ponzi scheme and looking to other central banks and creative finance and more Ponzi schemes, then that's a good thing that we need to start looking at some real reform now.
Right, Max Keiser in Paris, let's bring you on this as well. Of course, before we move on to the specifics of Greece, Spain or Italy and how they're involved in the European debt crisis, I guess they're in London saying that instead of talking about refinancing, recapitalising banks, for instance, we need some fundamental changes. What are those changes, and will those changes be discussed?
Well, I think the overall concern about the euro and the Eurozone is misplaced. If you're looking at a real trouble spot in the global economy, the UK and Japan are really the most troubling countries in the world for reasons I can get into. The Eurozone is really not in the bad shape that the policymakers tell us that it is in. They are basically extorting us into accepting things like transforming the European stability mechanism, the new financing fund, into a bank, which allows them to get 10 to 100 times leverage to recapitalize and refinance 5 to 10 trillion euros in debt. Of course, that'll make a lot of bankers fabulously wealthy. The people who don't have any political power now will continue not having any political power. But I don't see the euro breaking up, really, because they have a lot of path to go in terms of leveraging the European Union. The two countries that do look like they're going to explode and go the way of all flesh are the UK and Japan. Those are really the hot spots we'll be talking about in 6 months. Not Europe.
Right, I'll come back to that, Max, but let's just go to Tennessee now. Paul Barrow, have your opinion on this as well. Ms. Barrow, I guess they're in Paris saying that this is not as bad as they're letting us believe, and that this is about political and economic power, those who want to have that power still and even extend that power. First of all, would you agree with that?
Yeah, probably. I think so. I mean, austerity measures pretty much suggest that there's an effort to depress wages and raise profits for major global corporations. I think it's a massive conspiracy, really, to make money for the banks and for these large corporations.
Right, well, let's go to, I guess, back in London now. Simon Dixon, does this mean then that we're not going to see Greece leave the Eurozone, considering the situation that it's facing?
I, for one, would like to see Greece leave the Eurozone. I think they're faced with the ultimate opportunity to get away and rebuild their own currency. But what's really important is that they need to follow that with a complete restructuring of their banking system. And for me, I think the ultimate opportunity is for Greece to pioneer sustainable banking reform, and show the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, in fact, what can be rebuilt and what can be achieved without following, I guess, the model that was created in Britain, the Ponzi scheme.
Right, so Max Keiser, are you saying then that the European leaders, rather than letting Greece leave the Eurozone, they would prefer to give it a revised second bailout worth at least 130 billion euros and that they can afford that?
The goal of the Troika, that includes the IMF, the EU, and the ECB, who incidentally got Greece, the Greek government, to sign off on what's called the memorandum, which passed sovereignty from Greece to the IMF. Remember, George Papadreou, the leader of Greece at that time, was going to have a referendum on that. And then the Troika, these three entities, told him that he was not going to have a referendum, so he did not put it in front of the people, something that the president of Iceland did a couple of years ago, and the people voted down being occupied by foreign bankers, and as a result, that country is now thriving because they got rid of their banker infestation problem. But Greece, unfortunately, gave their sovereignty away to the Troika, so it's not up to Greece to leave the euro. They don't have that choice. They're not a sovereign state. They're being, the IMF is there every single day monitoring with hundreds of agents around the country, and the goal of the Troika is to acquire Greeks' assets, their income-producing assets, the ports, the lottery, the airports, the toll roads, to acquire these assets for next to nothing for the benefit of the patrons of the IMF. And this is going along great. It's working. It's working beautifully. But don't think, of course, I agree with Simon Dixon. It would be great for Greece to leave the euro. Yes, of course, that would be fantastic. But they don't have that choice. And they're not going to, because it's not up to them.
Paul Barrow, first of all, do you think that is the case as well, and that if it is, should Greece then be making that decision to take an independent stand here and move out of the Eurozone? We know that inside Greece there has been calls from the public or a lot of even economists there that maybe it would be even better for the country's economy if it did that. Basically, we are hearing even talks of getting concessions from Greece, and that the issue of Greece's sovereignty is now in question, as Max was saying there. What's your idea?
Well, I agree with Max. I think that's, I mean, I've seen that recommendation for a long time that they need to get out, and with sovereignty in question, I think that's the bottom line.
So, Simon Dixon, back to you. First of all, putting Greece aside now, the two next economies that are in question, Spain and Italy, are you predicting that these two countries are also going to face the crisis? They're also going to need the bailout. A lot of talk now about Spain getting nearer to that threshold where it's going to have to ask for a bailout. And if it does, what's going to be the European Union or the Troika's response to that?
Well, they'll find a new way of taking down another country in order to save one country. You have to remember, a while ago, I talked about it on this show, that it's the finance that is going on right now is not making any sense. See, there's a big problem when government are spending all their time on financial management and trying to figure out new creative ways of finding markets for their debt. At the moment, you know, why we're seeing these two countries is because Spain required a bailout, 100 billion, 125 billion, 400 billion is probably what it actually needed in order to not let their banking system go bust. And they look at creative deals, and Spain, you know, Italy comes along and they're borrowing from the market at 7% and then lending it at 3%, which is going to have a domino effect on Italy. And then once Italy comes along, we're going to find another country. Maybe we're going to look to the UK, who is in a worse situation, which is a bit of a joke how we still got a credit rating right now. You know, and we'll start looking at Portugal and Ireland and all sorts of other countries, because we're just doing creative things in order to try and sustain each other. And as Max Keiser talks about all the time, the churn of these products that pass in order to bail each other out leads to some nice healthy commissions to the financial sector.
Max Keiser, we've heard a lot now about the European Central Bank taking steps to tackle this debt crisis. And those steps we're hearing are things like a liquidity program or rate cuts. First of all, do you think that this is going to help and that we are going to actually see the European Central Bank be able to do something about this? Because at the same time, we have a former president of the World Bank, Robert Zoellick. He's saying that monetary easing is not going to help resolve the problem.
Well, the European Central Bank is already doing something. They are swapping toxic assets from these banks all over Europe in exchange for fresh, treasury paper, short-term treasury paper. They're expanding their balance sheet to accommodate a lot of toxic debts. And they are also engaging in artificially suppressing interest rates. And this is being done all over the world in programs like quantitative easing. This is to keep interest rates low, to keep the debt service on the junk that these central banks are taking on manageable. But it is causing a two-tier global economy where the added liquidity needed to take on this toxic debt is driving asset prices of the top 1 or 2% of wealth owners higher. So paintings, rare paintings, yachts, exotic islands, all of these prices are going up because of all the money that the central banks are using to keep interest rates low. But because interest rates are low, the savings return and wages are also low. So there's no fresh capital being earned. And you can't have capitalism without capital. So what you end up with is a system that's is post-capitalism. It's a system of command and control, run by central bankers, by and for central bankers and their friends. Look at what happened to Ireland. Before the crisis, Ireland had very little public debt. After the crisis, the government agreed to transfer 10 times the country's GDP in debt from Anglo-Irish Bank, one bank, onto the government's balance sheet, and then to pay that debt, the government imposed austerity. Now, if we were in the back alley of a ghetto somewhere, that would be called a lynching, or a robbery, which is this is all that we're talking about. It's a gang rape.
Right. In Tennessee now, Paul Barrow, speaking about how bailouts, austerity is going to help, or is it working at all? Looking at the situation in Greece, for instance, that has received that bailout, it's far behind with its reforms, first of all, to improve its finances and economy as a response, rather, as a promise that it made for more money that it got. And we're also seeing that it needs more time right now, it needs more money. So has the bailout option basically been a good one? And if not, what is needed then for economies like this? There's been talk of fiscal, structural reforms. What are those reforms?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't have the answer to that. I think that this bad paper that's out there that Max is talking about is really the crux of the problem. Crux in terms of salvation. I don't know that there's any salvation to it. I really think that it's on a downhill spiral, and I don't know that there's any plan that's ultimately going to rescue it. There's just too much out there. So that's, they can make these short-term bridges to save, various aspects of the economy, but in the long term, I think that, I don't know. We've got major problems on our hands. That's the best I can say about it.
And again, that has been an issue that's been brought up frequently by a lot of analysts, Simon Dixon, that this is just a short-term solution, that there is a leak in that vessel and we're trying to keep it afloat, but how long can we keep doing that while the leak is getting bigger and bigger? So I guess they're in Tennessee saying, what is the structural reforms that are needed? Do you have a response to that question?
Yeah, there's two major things which need to be tackled, and both of those are not being questioned and both of those are not being tackled at the moment. The first major thing is that if we're using all this bailout money in order to prop up a broken banking system, we need to question where that money is actually going. And at the moment, that money is going on bankers' bonuses, it's going on speculation, it's going on shadow banking, it's going on pushing up property prices, and it goes on consumer debt. Now, all of those are inflationary and disastrous activities if you're trying to stimulate an economy which is populated by a nation of people which are just on the verge of bankruptcy each and every month. So what we need to do is figure out how we can get such money into productive use. So Max Keiser talked about the two economies, Japan and UK. I think the UK is a lot worse than Japan, because what Japan does pretty well is they make sure that money goes to productive use. It goes to business, it goes to job creation. In the UK, it's all about property markets, consumer debt. So the money needs to go into something that produces jobs, that produces growth. The small business sector is the best one. That's responsible for about 60% of employment in the UK. And the other thing that really needs to be looked at is removing our reliance upon the too big to fail banking system. And the big thing which is holding on, the reason that we're so reliant on banks, is simply because banks create almost all of our money when they issue loans. And that needs to really be addressed, and that's the big reform and the big elephant in the closet.
Max Keiser, banks, the main problem here, would you agree?
Well, the crisis today is an echo of the crisis of the 1920s, the crash of 1929, and then the depression that followed the crash of 1929. Now, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came into office, he declared a bank holiday, he revalued the dollar, he put together the Pecora Commission to investigate banker crimes, and hundreds of bankers went to jail. And he set the stage, he brought about Glass-Steagall, and he set the stage for what became known as the American century. Now contrast that to Barack Obama. He comes into office after a similar banking crash. Everyone said that the crash of 2008 was just very similar to the crash of '29. What did Barack Obama do? He kept Larry Summers, Tim Geithner, and Ben Bernanke in office, the three primary architects of the crisis. He went out of his way to kowtow to Wall Street. He embraced Wall Street. He did the exact opposite of FDR. Barack Obama will go down in history as the American president that killed America.
And on that note, let's just bring in Paul Barrow's view on that as well, since it is about the United States economy there. Do you think, Paul Barrow, quickly if you can, that this is about an economy that's depending, or rather depends on protecting Wall Street in the case of the United States, rather than closing the tax loopholes? A lot of people are saying the governments are tightening austerity measures, putting the majority of the pressure on the ordinary citizens.
True. I think all of it is going to come back in the lap of Wall Street and United States, the United States banking system, because I think this is the origin of all that stuff. The Glass-Steagall Act was removed, and again, it's very difficult to predict because it has so many variables involved. But I really think that that's where it's going to land, and I think that to the extent that Barack Obama bears responsibility for it, I think that I really don't want to see him reelected. I really don't. I think that he's been a huge mistake in America, and I hope that some changes will be made there.
Paul Barrow, freelance writer and editor, speaking to us there via Skype from Tennessee. Thank you very much, Mr. Barrow. I'd also like to thank journalist and broadcaster Max Keiser, who was with us from Paris, and also in London, CEO of Bank to the Future, Simon Dixon. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being on this edition of News Analysis. And until our next programme, from me, Homa Lezgi, and the rest of the team here in Tehran, it's goodbye.